This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Bought at auction as an unknown portrait by an unknown Dutch master, this painting arrived needing a little bit of attention. There were some scratches and chips. It looked a bit odd, being so dramatic, and it needed the perfunctory work, cleaning, and new varnish. The painting was striking in its composition, a figure peering out of the shadows, the light catching his face and casting a strong shadow on his shoulder. His expression, brooding and intense, was certainly captivating. But there were things that were odd about the painting. Areas where we could see the underpaint through, and areas where the paint just looked dirty or not fully cleaned, and other areas that looked brand new and stood out for their crispness and strong contrast. But mostly, we were trying to add back a sense of subtlety and nuance, a softness to this painting that just wasn't present when it arrived at the studio. The tacking edges appeared to have been from the face of the painting, and I wondered if it had been cropped down at some point in the past. And of course, the painting was affixed to what appeared to be a new stretcher with a lining, for seemingly no apparent reason. And all of this needs to be addressed. But above everything else, all the work that's going to be done is going to give this painting a new life, bring it out from the shadows and into the light where it can be enjoyed as it was always intended. And for over 20 years, Squarespace has been bringing businesses, ideas, and creativity out of the shadows and into the light of the internet. It all begins with choosing a template. And Squarespace has tens of thousands of professionally designed, beautiful templates that will work anywhere, from desktop to tablet to mobile phones, ensuring a unified experience for all of your visitors. Once you've selected a website, you give it a title, and then the fun part, customization. With Squarespace, just about everything is customizable with a simple click, from your fonts, which will update across the entire website when you choose a new package, to the colors that are used across your website for buttons and highlights and other interactive elements. And of course, making the website your own is as easy as clicking on what you see and editing it. That's it. No complicated code to understand, no programming, just click and edit. And what took Squarespace 20 years to perfect can be yours in just a few minutes, allowing you to focus on what's important: your business, your creativity, and your passion. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The process of bringing this portrait out of the shadows begins by shining some light on the work that was done in the past, and removing all of it. The first step is separating the canvas from the stretcher, and here tacks were used, which makes it relatively easy to remove this canvas. Once all of the tacks have been removed, I'll turn to my iron because it appears that this canvas has been glued down to the stretcher, and I'm going to see if a little bit of heat will soften up this adhesive enough that I can peel it back before I have to turn to solvents. The use of heat-activated adhesives in conservation is widely known, and this is one of the reasons why. With exposure to a little bit of heat, the adhesive softens and I can peel it back when warm, thus avoiding scraping or exposure to solvents, which is always desired if possible. While I'm not particularly a fan of adhering the canvas down to the stretcher, it makes a mess and it can't be reused, all of this old material will be thrown away and replaced with better. The first surprise that I encounter is that there are staples in between this canvas layer and the nylon layer that was glued down to the stretcher. And I'm not exactly sure why this is the case. I'm not sure why tacks wouldn't have been used, and I'm not sure why there are two different layers, but I'm going to find out. Another thing that I notice is that this is a new stretcher that's been stained dark, and previously you could see the edge of the support raw pine. And this is usually an attempt at making something look older than it is. There's no harm in that, but it strikes me as somewhat suspicious. Another surprise is that this stretcher has cracked from the use of those heavy tacks. Another reason why lighter weight tacks would have been more suited to this conservation. This stretcher has failed and must now be replaced. I'll use the iron and the application of more heat on the edge to separate this canvas from this nylon strip, and it appears that this canvas was just a loose lining, not actually adhered down to the original. And it seems that we have our first positive surprise, a stamp on the verso. This is always exciting because this points to provenance, and maybe, just maybe, the name of the artist or the sitter. The loose lining provides absolutely no structural support to this painting and is done mostly for cosmetic reasons and to keep the back of the canvas clean. But it strikes me as wholly unnecessary and somewhat superfluous to add material that doesn't have any purpose other than cosmetic. Another surprise, neither good nor bad, is that there appears to have been some structural support here along the tacking edge. But I'm still focused on this stamp and inscription. For this is always an exciting moment in the studio, for both me and the client. Just as I did before, the use of heat on this nylon strip, a reinforcement along the tacking edge, will allow me to peel it off of the original canvas. Though this adhesive can be removed with heat, it is very tenacious and very gummy and leaves quite a bit of residue behind, which I will have to contend with later on. After testing multiple solvents to see what would break up that adhesive, I have turned to a solvent gel. I'm going to paint this solvent gel on a small section and let it sit to see if this is going to achieve the desired result of removing or softening up that adhesive enough that I can come back with a scalpel and scrape it off the canvas. After a few minutes, it has broken down that adhesive and I can remove it. Though this is a tedious process, it is necessary as any of this adhesive residue will complicate the procedures that I have planned in the future for this painting. So all of this old work must go. The removal of this adhesive is tedious and time-consuming, but there's no other faster way. And it strikes me that this adhesive may not actually be conservation grade, for if it was, exposure to the right solvent would simply lift it off, and I wouldn't have to go through this much work. With all of that glue residue removed, I can now remove the old residue of the rabbit skin glue that was used in a previous lining. My guess is that at one point the lining was removed, but the adhesive residue was not. And again, this will complicate the procedures that I have planned, so it must too be removed. After painting on a layer of a different cleaning gel, this one water-based, that will swell the old rabbit skin glue, I can come back with a dulled scalpel. Yes, I want the blunt edge, not the sharp edge, and simply glide across the surface and remove all of this old natural rabbit skin glue. And while scraping across the unstamped and inscribed areas is okay, that level of friction might cause harm. So here I am gently gliding over the surface, not touching the canvas, still leaving a layer of glue. I just want to remove as much of the glue as I can without abrading this inscription or stamp. Once I've removed as much as I can, I'll come back with a little bit of water and a toothbrush and eventually a cotton swab, and that will lift off all of the residue while keeping the stamp preserved. Finally, I'll place some felt and weights on the wet area to let it dry without distorting the canvas. The same procedure is repeated for the other areas with stamps or inscriptions, preserving them for the future. I've decided to go back across the entire canvas with a little bit of water and cotton balls to remove any rabbit skin glue adhesive residues. You can see that simply rubbing across the surface lifts up quite a bit of residue, and then with my hand I can get rid of the rest and ensure a clean canvas free of glue. But now, as the canvas has been exposed to moisture, it must go on the hot table, because if I don't do this treatment now, the canvas will distort and wrinkle, and that wouldn't be good. The turquoise sheet of material is a release layer that will prevent the canvas and any residues from bonding to the cotton blotter paper that's used to draw out any moisture. After allowing the painting to sit under weights and acclimatize to the studio's relative humidity, I can remove it and begin the cleaning process. When I first received this painting, I made a test, and I discovered that there was overpaint across, well, the entire painting. And now I'm about to find out why. You can see this new overpaint coming right off with the correct solvent. The decision to overpaint the entire collar was one that was probably taken on as a result of a heavy-handed attempt at cleaning this painting, which in turn resulted in skinning, the removal of some of the top layers of paint, leaving a threadbare canvas, and in this case, a collar that looked worse for wear. Overpainting it was an attempt at rectifying that mistake. But another mistake that I'm finding was that the painting was never properly cleaned. You can see in the white areas there's a lot of grime still left in the impasto, perhaps old varnish or surface grime that was never properly removed. And so they did all of this work without doing the most basic steps from the get-go. Compare the left collar to the right collar, and you can see just how bright and crisp and strengthened the one on the right is. Now, while that may be a more appealing look, it is not original to the artist or the painting. This is an addition by somebody else's hand, and it's relatively new. It comes off fairly easily. This type of work has no place on a painting, has no business being there, and as a result is going to be removed. I had hoped that the face would be free of tinkering, but of course, another surprise lurking in the shadows. Just about the entire face has been glazed in, using thin, transparent paints to, again, unify the surface and clean up mistakes during the previous cleaning process. Here, too, on the beard, we can see what happens when the old paint is removed. The whole mustache was covered in overpaint for that little loss, and the whole beard glazed in to get rid of these lighter spots, which were likely a result of skinning. Luckily, the eyes appear to have been relatively free of damage. After discovering that stamp and inscription, I started to do a bit of research, and I found that the numbers contained within that rectangular box coincided with the size of this canvas. And when the painting first came in, I suspected that it had been cropped or shrunk down to fit a store-bought stretcher, rather than purchasing or fabricating a custom size to fit the painting, They made the painting fit the support. And my suspicions were validated. The size of this canvas was larger than when it came in. In fact, the size of this canvas is precisely the size of what you see here, all the way to the edges. And so, in order to preserve and save all of that material, I'm going to start bridging this area, which has separated as a result of the creasing during the previous stretching process. The use of little strands of Belgian linen laid across this separation will support it without being as heavy-handed as a patch. Believe it or not, these little strands will provide just as much support as a big patch while being lighter weight and not running the risk of telegraphing to the face of the painting over time, which can happen with large patches. I lay them down in a little bed of adhesive and then paint the adhesive around them. And then, eventually, I'll put them all under weights and let it sit for a little while. Once I'm confident that the adhesive has dried, I'll peel back the felt and I'll see the work. But this is not all of the structural work that I need to do on this painting. Remember, it is going to be as large as it is now, so we have to add some material to facilitate tacking. And in this case, I'm using a proper heat-activated conservation-grade adhesive film, one that can be removed with heat easily, unlike what I encountered before. In addition, I'm going to cover my bridging with this heat-activated adhesive so that my strip lining can go over it. The bridging alone probably won't be strong enough to withstand the stretching process, and even if it is, I don't want to take the risk. It would be really unfortunate if this tore as I was stretching the canvas. Once the adhesive is cooled, I can peel back the release film that's on the back and lay down my canvas for strip lining. Normally, the canvas would stop about here, but I'm increasing the amount of exposure because this tacking edge was creased, and I suspect that it's weakened. And so by making my strip lining a little bit larger, going a little bit deeper into the field of the canvas, I can ensure that there's proper support. I'm following my iron with a weight with a piece of red oak attached to the bottom, effectively known as a clapper. And this piece of wood will absorb the ambient moisture that's coming off of the canvas as a result of the exposure to the iron and prevent it from distorting. Once all of the structural work has been complete, I can now marry the painting with a new custom-built support that I had fabricated for this canvas. No off-the-shelf, store-bought support will fit, and so we have to go custom. I'm going to be using tacks, but a smaller or lighter weight version as compared to what was used before, precisely because I don't want to split this support. The tacking process begins by putting a few tacks in the center of each edge and pulling the canvas taut so that we have good tension in the center of the canvas. And then I can work my way from the center to the edges. On the first edge, I don't use the pulling plier because there's only one tack on the opposing edge, and that would be too much tension on that one spot. I'll just check with my hands. Once that first edge is complete, then I can use the pulling plier to start adding tension across the entire canvas. Standing or sitting, it doesn't really make a difference. And now, instead of gluing this canvas down to the stretcher, I'm going to tack it. Perhaps it's because I like the way it looks, or perhaps it's to make the next conservator's job a little bit easier. Either way, I think it's the right way to do it, and that's why I do it. Little wooden triangles or keys are inserted into the mortises of the free-floating corner joints on the stretcher, and then tapped. This will expand the stretcher and add a little bit of tension to the canvas and make up for any that was left during the stretching process. While tapping in the keys, I'll check with my left hand to make sure that the tension on the face of the canvas is precisely what I want. And then after that, I'll bind the keys in place with a little bit of fishing line and another tack to make sure that they don't get lost or slip in between the canvas and make a dent. Before any work can be done on the retouching of this painting, I first need to fill in all of these losses. Because this canvas was cropped and stretched to a smaller size and tacked through the actual face of the painting, there are numerous holes and also several areas of paint loss, not to mention the tear that I had to bridge because of this crease. Using a fill-in medium, I'll go over all of these areas, sometimes twice or even 3 times, making sure that I've built up a smooth surface, and then let it dry. Once dry, I can come back with a couple of swabs and water and begin the, again, tedious process of removing the overfill. I want the fill-in medium to exist only where there are losses or divots, not all over the painting. And by removing this, I can ensure that the area that I'm going to retouch is just where the paint was lost. It can be tedious, but again, there isn't any more efficient way of doing this, and using my hands allows me to feel the surface to make sure that it is exactly as smooth as I like. Because this painting has no impasto or textural buildup of paint, this is a relatively simple procedure. Because this painting is very, very dark, I'm going to be applying an isolation layer so that I can see the colors in a fully saturated state. This synthetic resin will mimic what the painting looks like when finally varnished, and allows me to retouch according to that. You can see just how much the painting is changing. These blacks are getting really dark and inky. If I were to retouch them without this isolation layer, I might retouch them more chalky, and then when the final varnish would be applied, nothing would match. While some of the areas of retouching on this piece, particularly the edges where there are lots of losses, are fairly straightforward, fill in the losses and retouch them away, the areas that are skinned are a little bit more complicated, because I can't simply glaze over this whole area with a wide brush. That's precisely what was done last time. So what I have to do is use lots and lots of little dots of varying color to kind of bring it back into itself, if that makes any sense. I don't really know what was here because it's been removed, but I know that the canvas as peeking through is not what's supposed to be there. I'll take my cues from the brushwork around the area I'm retouching and try to better unify these thin areas by making up the difference. Now again, this is all a matter of camouflage and kind of mimicking what's there. If there were a way that I could see this painting before it was previously cleaned and all of the paint was skinned, then I would have a better understanding of what was there, and I could try to either recreate that or better meet that. But in this case, what we are doing is mostly trying to minimize the impact of the damage, while not making too many editorial leaps. It's a fine line to walk, but one that's challenging and both exciting at the same time. With all of that retouching complete, I can now varnish the painting. And this top layer of varnish will serve two purposes. One, to provide an ultraviolet protective coating for the painting. And two, to give a sheen that I think is going to make this painting look really good. It looks pretty good now, but I want something a little bit glossier, a little bit more glittery, with just a little bit more oomph. And yeah, that's the technical term, oomph. Once I apply the varnish, I'll keep making multiple passes over it as the solvent evaporates from the resin, and this allows me to control the sheen and get precisely what I want. Though the work on this painting, as difficult and time-consuming as it was, did not reveal a radical transformation, a certain subtlety and delicacy, a softness has been returned. Those harsh, crisp edges around the collar, the overpaint on the face that obscured subtle details has all been taken off, and in its wake we can see a more natural painting. Some of the areas of extreme skinning or damage still have scars that we decided to leave for fear of going down the same path as the previous conservator and being too heavy-handed. But even in its current state, the visibility of the thin layers of paint, the brushwork, the way the artist created this painting are now more visible, and that matters. The light coming through the hair on his beard, the highlights in his mustache, those were all obscured before, and now we can see them, and they add to his emotional expression, which is what this painting is about. In addition, we can now finally see this painting in its proper format. With nearly 1 inch added to the perimeter, it feels like it has more room to breathe, and that changes how we interpret the man's expression. And what of that inscription on the back? Well, though we executed a lot of research, my client and I were unable to find an artist, a sitter, or a collector with that name. And in all likelihood, this portrait is of an actor from the early 1800s in costume for a period production. And this painting executed to commemorate that performance and likely displayed in the theater or by the artist himself. And so, while there are still blanks to be filled in, we know more about this work, not only about what it's supposed to look like, but we have some historical context for it. And in those subtle ways, we have brought this painting into the light and from the shadows.